Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the Climate Action Joint Committee on the 26th of August 2024. We will kick off with a karakia. Sam, would you be able to lead us in a karakia? There's one on the table there if you need it.
I'll do whakataka. So I'll lead off and carry the day. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. He hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. We'll kick into apologies. We have one from Annette Brosnan and Juliet Gregg from NCC. Got others?
Me, Sandra.
Yes.
Robbie. Mare Apatu.
And Mare Apatu. Did you catch that one?
And Robbie Paul.
Okay. Cool. Can I have a mover for the apologies, please?
Sure.
Thanks, Councillor Harding, and second by Paul Kelly. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Do we have any conflicts of interest today?
Aye. One of the items refers to the Hawke's Bay Future Farming Trust, of which I'm a trustee. I'll highlight it when we get towards that item.
Brilliant.
And same goes for myself, also a trustee. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And can we have confirmation of the minutes?
Chair, I just noticed that there was an attachment at the end, email from the PA, and there was a graph there. The graph hasn't come through, at least on the Stellar version that I'm looking for. It was a lovely graph showing our progress on emissions reduction in the agriculture sector, as I recall. So it would be great if we could just tidy that up.
Okay.
Yeah, might just be my version. I don't know if other people.
It's not on mine.
Okay. We have that.
It's for the electronic record then. Thank you.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
Happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. And a seconder. Thank you, Mayor Walker. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, as for the rest of the agenda, first up we're going to do item 4, and then we're going to actually bring item 6 next, and that's because it gives us a little bit more detail about the regional climate risk assessment and sort of what's involved in the work plan before we go back to item 5, which has us endorsing some timeframes. So we felt like it would be better to have the detail of what the what is before we endorse the how long. So if we step into paper 4, now looking to governance, do we need to...
I'm happy through you, Madam Chair, to lead off on this one.
Brilliant.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This report seeks a decision of the Joint Committee to amend the terms of reference, to firstly appoint a new chair, and to make a small number of changes to the terms of reference. One, to make that leadership change possible, and a few other minor changes to acknowledge the sort of context that we're in, some changes to legislation that affects us in the work of the committee, and some procedural sort of improvements. The approach that we've taken is to do the minimal changes in light of the fact that we are 14 months away for the triennium, and that's probably a more appropriate time to make substantive changes, and also just aware that when you make a change to the terms of reference, it has to go back to the member committees, and it's a bit of back and forth and can take time. So we're trying to minimise any delay. in adopting those terms of reference. Attached to the cover report is the track changes, so you can see the changes that are proposed. And in the paper itself, there is a table outlining the changes to each clause and the reasons for those. One that I'll draw your attention to is clause 5, which is where we make the change that allows the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's chair to nominate another Hawke's Bay Regional Council Joint Committee member to act as chair, to allow for some flexibility of leadership. Probably also a good opportunity to confirm any other membership changes that are happening to the committee, and such as Councillor Hannah Monteputo Hendry, who's joining, replacing Anne Redstone. We have Juliet Gregg replacing Jad Tariha as the alternate for Napier City Council. Caudry Huata, who will be representing Tamatea Pōkai Whenua, and Robbie Paul will be representing Mangaharu Tangatu Trust. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm interested in the logic of the Regional Council holding the chairmanship. I appreciate that we're trying to do minor changes this time, but I'd be interested to understand that logic, given we can have some outstanding chairs that are from other entities as well. So not a criticism of any people, but more future focused.
Did you want to speak to that, Hannah White?
Kia ora, Tanya. Kia ora tātou. I would like to be in the room with you, but I don't want to share my bugs. And just a warm welcome to the new members sitting around the tepu. So when we established this joint committee, given its spread across the rohe, and also our TAG group, so our technical advisors within our council, sort of the home is with Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So it doesn't necessarily have to go this way, but I guess it makes more sense from a coordination point of view and an office point of view to have Hawke's Bay Regional Council Governor chairing that can work closely alongside the TAG leads amongst all the other council advisory positions. So I guess that was the logic when we first established the joint committee at the start of the term.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I am aware of other regional committees where the chair is not necessarily a part of the committee that holds a, if I call it, secretariat role. So I don't want to change it this time. I just want to flag it that at the end of the triennium, I think it would be more appropriate that the committee elects its chair and its deputy based on those that are around the table.
Noted for the minutes. Is there any further questions or discussions?
But I'm just going to agree with Councillor that I was going to bring something similar up, and as usual, Tony is always in front of me on these things. But I do agree with her. I'd like to see it reviewed later on.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I'll speak to the motion when we get there.
Okay. If there's no further questions or discussions, I'll put the motion. So the recommendations in front of us are that we receive the committee leadership and terms of reference amendment staff report. We recommend the attached amended terms of reference to each of the member councils for adoption, and that we appoint Councillor Zan Harding as the chair of the Climate Action Joint Committee. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Chair Hinamai Ormsby. And I'm happy to second from the chair. Did you want to speak to the motion, Chair Ormsby?
Yeah, kia ora, Chair. I'd just like to say, look, it's been fantastic working alongside you and the other governance, but this is really a request to step aside as the paper provides those reasons, and I have every faith in Zan to take up this role, working closely alongside yourself. I will stay as an alternate for HBRC. But essentially just flagging that, look, this mahi is so important to get on with, but competing priorities have sort of pulled me in other directions at this stage. And I think the work program that is going to be presented later on really does allow us for a refresh alongside our new members around the table. So I'm really happy to support these recommendations, acknowledging what's been said by the councillors so far around I guess the bigger change of amendments starting next term. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Yes, Tanya?
Anyway, thank you for your service to this committee. I'm pleased you're still going to be part of this as alternative, and I know you'll keep a strong watch on the progress that we make. And having worked with Zan, I very much support him as our new chair. Thank you.
Kia ora. Yep, Councillor Harding.
Chair. Look, and firstly, apologies from my point of view that for you having to chair today. That wasn't the intention, and it does seem a little unfair. The most important thing I wanted to say today is that you and I have worked really closely over the last couple of months to get to this position. In the end, it was really council staff, to my understanding, driving the final decision around chairmanship. I've made it really, really clear that I want to work in partnership with you. We explored whether we could work as co-chairs. As it turned out, that wasn't possible, as far as I'm concerned, and I think you share approach that we will shoulder it together and do the best for the region on this really important stuff. Thank you.
Kia ora. Any other speakers? I suppose as I second it, I'll just mention, I think this is a pragmatic approach. I think as Tanya and Tim have brought up, it would have been nice to put it to the committee and have an open election again, but through the route that we've taken to get here, this is where we've landed, and happy to support the direction from the chair, and yeah. So with that, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? Unanimous, thank you. Right, so next, and congratulations, Chair Harding. Right, we're going to move to, as said before, we're going to move to item 6, the Regional Climate Action Risk Assessment, which is on page 21 of your agenda. And I'll pass to the staff to lead us off on this. Oh, and kia ora to Nikki, who's just joined us online.
Kia ora, everybody.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll just take this opportunity first before we get into this item to introduce the TAG to my left, in particular Amberley Gibson. So you'll remember at our last meeting in March, the sort of the primary author of many of the papers and the convener of the TAG was Pippa McKelvey-Sebelou. She has since moved to France with her French husband and 3 children. And in the interim, we were lucky enough to recruit Amberley. She comes to us from, most recently MFE, where she was working on the National Adaptation Plan, as well as advising on RMA reform before that. Amberley did start her career, I think, well, early on in her career here as a consent planner, and then went to MFE, Waka Kotahi, and now we're lucky enough to get her back. So she has been directly involved in policy setting in the climate adaptation space, so we are very lucky to have her. And then to her left is Michelle Grigg from Napier City Council, who's joined the TAG recently, and you'll know Dylan Mugridge from Central Hawke's Bay. And I'm going to hand over to Amberley for this item. Oh, and I did forget to mention Hastings District Council's tag member who couldn't make it here today.
It's Graham Palmer.
Graham.
Just give me a moment. Kia ora koutou, ko Amberley Gibson tōku ingoa. Thanks Desiree for the introduction, and I just wanted to, before we start, acknowledge Dylan and Michelle and Graham as well, who can't be here today. We've been working really collaboratively on these papers in the last little while, so it's really exciting to be able to be here and present to you today. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the regional climate change risk assessment work. I'm aware that the committee has had several discussions about this work to date. So a regional climate change risk assessment is foundational to building resilience to a changing climate. And I know we've talked about this around this table before. To support informed climate decision-making and planning, we need a really thorough understanding of the risks that we're facing as a region. And we know that we're not all going to feel the impacts of climate change the same way, that the impacts will be disproportional. But a risk assessment forms a really significant evidence base for us to talk about and understand what these risks are and what that could really mean for people. So I would just point to there that the range of climate risks and impacts we need to adapt to is much broader than natural hazard events, and hopefully through our discussion today we can better understand what we mean when we say the full range of climate risks that we may experience. I've talked to, it'll give us a comprehensive view of the different impacts we'll experience, and it will support decision making, but it's also a really great tool for communicating with our communities about climate change. So what is a regional climate change risk assessment? It's a public-facing risk assessment, so that in itself is different to much of the risk assessment work that does go on already. At its heart, it's a process of identifying, evaluating and prioritising a range of risks posed by climate change. And this diagram here that you'll see is taken from Aotearoa New Zealand's first National Climate Change Risk Assessment that was published in 2020 by the Ministry for the Environment. This is the top 10 most significant risks that Aotearoa will face from climate change over a 6-year period. You can see from there that the range of risks are quite broad and they cover several domains, but they do go much broader than, say, natural hazard direct risks. They can include risks to our natural environment, our built environment, our people, our communities, including cultural heritage, social cohesion, our economy, and our governance too. When we think about what a regional climate change risk assessment is, I find it sometimes quite helpful too to think about what it's not. So it's not purely a map showing the location of natural hazards, so something like the hazards portal, which we all know really well. It's not a risk assessment that is really granular down to a property level. It's pitched at a regional district level. It's not a plan, it's not a strategy for action, it's the part that comes before that. And I think this next point's really the important point, is that it's not intended to duplicate existing work. We know that there's a lot of work underway across our region, particularly post-cyclone, to understand our risks, to build a really robust information and evidence base around climate change. So instead, these are all inputs into a risk assessment process. So in that sense, it's a really good opportunity to understand what that looks like at a regional scale and where those different pieces are, and I guess take our blinkers off. It's also not only reliant on quantitative inputs. So in terms of the qualitative work that goes into a risk assessment, we would usually look to get these through our conversations and targeted engagement with subject matter experts, treaty partners and stakeholders. And that's a really, really critical part of what a risk assessment is. It does go beyond the quantitative. So what does the end product look like? There is national guidance. So the Ministry for the Environment released guidance on how to carry out regional climate risk assessments in 2021. It sets out a really clear process and a methodology that uses both those quantitative and qualitative inputs. And this is the process that's been followed by many other regions who have undertaken risk assessments across the country. So this is just a bit of a selection of some regions who have completed their risk assessments in the last few years. I think the most recent of which is the Wellington region, which was a partnership across several district and the regional authority. To date, the output of all regional risk assessments has been in the form of a published report. It's made publicly available. But I would note that some reports make better use of tools that show information spatially, and I know that's something that we do talk about a lot, about how powerful it is to be able to display information in that way. So as the TAG's investigating different scope and scale options for this work, that's something that's quite front of mind for us, and including how user-friendly these documents are, given it is public-facing and we want it to be used for quite a wide range. So moving to the climate risk assessment process, it's helpful to understand how is risk assessed through this kind of risk assessment process. Well, at a high level, risks are assessed based on information about the what and the who will be impacted by what climate change hazards. So that's that pink circle up there. The level of exposure to different hazards. So in this context, when we're talking about exposure, we mean how exposed are you to that particular hazard? And then your level of vulnerability to the different hazards. And as you can see in that bottom diagram, vulnerability is sensitivity, so how sensitive are you, and what is your adaptive capacity? So how able are you to adapt or reduce your risk to that, experiencing that impact? I'd say a good example, if we're using this diagram here, is like with heat waves. So we won't all experience the impacts of a heat wave the same. If we take, for example, exposure, we know that in built-up urban areas, the heat effect will be felt differently to how it may be felt in other parts of our region. The way that our homes are built, whether there's good ventilation, whether they're surrounded by green spaces, they will all impact the level of exposure. But then the vulnerability piece, and that's the piece here I'd really like to focus on, because I think it's the real point of difference with this kind of work, is that it looks at how vulnerable are our people who we know are quite exposed. So that starts to look, and there's both qualitative and quantitative information that would inform that. So it might be within these homes that we've identified as having quite high exposure, how many people are vulnerable? So are they our elderly communities? Are they lower socioeconomic? Do they have perhaps less means to reduce their risk, i.e. they can't afford to run a heat pump or an air conditioning unit. They might not have an air conditioning unit, as an example. The other thing here that I've got is climate risks are assessed based on different time horizons. So that's something that there are choices there around what kind of time horizons we would want to assess risk against, whether that's to the present day risk through to now, between now and 2050, or 2050 to 2100. And I would note that different time horizons can be used for different types of risks. So it may be more appropriate in some instances than others. And to speak to that too, there's also different climate scenarios. So we know that over a longer period of time, we've got much greater uncertainty about what the impacts of climate change are going to look like. And that's one way when we're making decisions with uncertainty, that we can consider a range of options as well. The other thing I would just note there is that little orange circle that says prioritisation. That's the part that happens after we get the outputs from the risk assessment, and there's no clear process for exactly how regions prioritise their risks, but it is the point where we decide, which risks we've identified that we've gone, these are a priority and we want to take them forward for, say, more localised adaptation, action and planning. And there's lots of learnings to be shared from other councils and other regions who have done this work. The other thing climate risk assessments do is they tell us a story about direct and cascading risks and impacts. So your paper does talk about this a bit, and this figure is taken from the paper. So We know all too well that there are a massive range of impacts that we can feel and risks that can come from a point source event, for example. So if we take, intense rainfall events, there's several direct risks and impacts associated with that, but then there's the ones that perhaps they linger as well. The loss of our telecommunications, our inability to access work, and the economic impacts that has had on our region if we look at Cyclone Gabrielle, for example. And then we've got risk to community wellbeing. So if we just think back to that diagram of the range of risks that we can experience and that can be identified through a risk assessment, that's the picture it starts to build for us. And understanding vulnerability is a really critical part of that. This is an example of what we mean when we say, like, within a risk assessment report, that there's a large amount of information. There's a lot of written information and a lot of spatial maps and tools to help display the information. But generally, consistently, you will see in a risk assessment report tables like this. So this is taken from just some snippets from the Canterbury region one. I've chosen a range of risks there just to give you a bit of a flavour as to the types of risks that we will see. You can also see here that they've chosen to look at a range of time periods. So they looked at the present, they looked at 2050, and they looked at 2100. And as I mentioned earlier, they've chosen to use 2 different climate scenarios for the time period that is further away, and that's around that level of uncertainty we have for decision making. So what will having a regional risk assessment mean for us as a region? Well, we're doing some work at the moment to understand different user needs. The paper sets out the approach that we're taking to that. But ultimately, this is a really foundational piece for climate action. It's really essential for making climate-informed decisions. The paper sets out a range of ways that this risk assessment information can be used. And ultimately, I think there's 4 things there that we'd like to highlight, that having this will enable us to, 1, prioritise where to invest and take action now and over the longer term. 2, it will ensure we're not duplicating effort and working in silos. We talked about that a bit earlier, that all those different pieces of work that are happening across the region, a lot of that's held within our organisations. It's not publicly accessible to our communities. There's also work that our communities are doing, with sector groups and a range of industries. So it's a really good opportunity to work collaboratively as a region to bring together all those different sources of data and information that we have, and that will help us as well to understand where are our gaps, and we will always have gaps. That is a challenge that everyone grapples with. I think it's part of acknowledging that we're on a journey, and it's a journey we will always be on, because it's just the nature of the problem. It's constantly changing, and there's a lot of work happening at a national level as well to plug some gaps about our understanding, and that will have different levels of relevance for us in terms of the level of data that they provide. So there's a lot of work, and we'll speak to this more in the work program item shortly, but there's kind of 2 pieces of work that I think we as a TAG see here. There's the risk assessment and developing our first risk assessment, like really getting on and getting that done, and acknowledging that there will be some gaps in information, and we'd like to do some work as a priority to really understand what those are, and are there any kind of easy wins that we can fill for this first risk assessment, and then starting to build a longer term line of sight over where those gaps are and what we can do about it, and we can talk more about that in the work program item. The third is, and I've just touched on this, that it will give visibility to the work councils are already doing to reduce risks to our communities. I think there's a lot of really good work that is happening, and actually perhaps our communities don't know everything that we are doing. And 4th, supporting our communities to take action to transition to a more resilient, low emissions future. This is a public-facing document. We don't have anything like this. In terms of the impact it could have for us as a region, we can shift the conversation to going, well, how do we work together collaboratively to help support our sectors, help support communities, so help support iwi Māori to have conversations about what their impacts are, and how we can all work together to understand where we need to prioritise action urgently, and where we can make a plan for over time. So where are we now and next steps? The paper sets out these points here really around what the tag's focused on between now and November, subject to endorsement of the work program today. I mentioned that we've already started doing work on risk assessment user needs scoping. We're also investigating different risk assessment options. So while we have some initial ideas, we're still needing to shape some of that up, and we'll intend to come back to you with that on some options for both scale and different ways that we could approach it. Developing an engagement plan for the risk assessment work stream, and again, we can come to this in the work program, but that piece there is quite a critical piece, and there's some decisions to be made there, but it needs to also fit in within the wider engagement work that may fall into this work program and broader than that as well. We're really conscious of the level of engagement and consultation that's happening out in our communities at the moment. And then fourthly, undertaking an initial prioritisation exercise to identify any high priority data gaps for that first regional risk assessment. And with that, I'll probably leave it there and happy to take any questions.
Zen.
Sure, Chair. Thank you, Amberley. Look, I think I'm trying to situate this report in sort of the context of not only our activity but national activity. So first thing, so I think you said in 2020 there was a national risk assessment done. Is there a specific, I think there is specific guidance about doing it at a regional level. Could you just perhaps explain a little bit more about how essentially that's an important
How it all
next
fits
step?
in? Yeah, sure.
And how that might relate not only to what other regions have done, but also where we're going from a national policy perspective and how that might fit into work that we have to do in future, please.
Yes, definitely. I might just nip back to that first slide, actually, this one here. So this little diagram here, and I've highlighted in green the assess impacts, vulnerability and risk, because that's where we are now. And this is like a high-level version of what we'd consider an adaptation cycle. So first and foremost, you understand your risk. So you talked about what's happened at a national level. The Zero Carbon Act was passed in 2019, and then from that, the first national risk assessment was produced. And then from that, the National Adaptation Plan, which I was fortunate enough to be involved with, was produced following that. So that follows the cycle here around once we understand our risks, we can then prioritise, we can then produce. We can really focus on what is our plan to do something about these risks, because I know we're all really eager to move beyond talking about it and get to doing something about it. And I think that's the key piece there is we need to understand what it is we need to do something about and have confidence that we've got a really comprehensive understanding of that. And that's, I think, a real strength of this risk assessment too, is that it's really challenging when we're facing impacts. We're experiencing them now that we're really focused on this particular hazard, say, or this particular risk. And if we don't have this, we don't have visibility of what the other risks are that could happen perhaps in these parts of our region or at varying levels of severity. So, and then I guess just following on from that to finish this point is that then you implement the plan and then noting that there's a point here around monitoring and evaluating how that is over time. So we would expect that over time, the actions that we are taking to reduce our risk and adapt to a changing climate are going to make a difference. And so doing risk assessments, this isn't like a do it once, never do it again exercise. So the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, for example, is done every 6 years. I'm not necessarily proposing we do it that frequently. I don't actually know how frequently other regions are intending to do theirs. They are quite a time-intensive exercise, so I wouldn't say that necessarily they have to be that frequent, but we would expect that over time our risks are going to change, the information we have about our risks will change, and also the actions that we're taking will reduce that risk. So I guess then moving to your second point, which is around kind of where does this fit within the national context. So the other thing I would say is, and this will come up a little bit later in the statutory advocacy update, but there is work going on at central government. This government's made it very clear that when it comes to climate policy, adaptation is their focus. We are seeing more announcements around the development of this adaptation framework. We don't quite know exactly what that's going to look like yet, and I think we should know more later in the year. Until then, yeah, it's a little bit of a guess. But what we do know is that what is coming for local government is more requirements to share what we know about risk with our communities. We know that there is likely, so I know Ministry for the Environment this week signalled that and released that they are going to proceed with their national direction on natural hazards decision making. So again, those kind of pieces. So I think you can have a fair degree of confidence that there's a range of areas, I guess, both at a national government work program and in our regional work program, that are going to benefit from having this information.
Okay, thank you. So if I can take it from that, the expectation is this work will fit into a planning framework, but it's not a planning and response framework that is a fairly nationally standard and drives our work.
Oh, definitely.
But it's
yeah.
not, the output of the stage is not statutory, it doesn't have any weight, it's not something that we do this, it doesn't, the TLAs
No.
don't have to apply it or anything. So
No, it
it's
doesn't.
guidance.
Yeah, it doesn't have, the only requirements to do risk assessments at this stage are at a national level. As I said, there is that guidance there, but I think it's more that many regions have seen the value of doing it, and I think we can expect more in this space around the expectations of us around understanding our risks. I know there's been very clear signals for the adaptation framework that climate data and information is a really key component of that framework, and understanding what is a robust climate data information system look like, both at a regional level and a national level, and overcoming some of the challenges of that.
Mayor Walker?
Kia ora, thank you. Look, this is no-brainer. How do we go faster? So to set us up to succeed is the point that you've made. It's critical to get the initial planning stages right, and some bullet points there of things that need to be done. Is there something getting in the way of you doing that pre-work faster? Is that something that we can assist with? I'm interested in let's just get on. So if there's anything that's particularly challenging in that planning phase, what is it that we can change to make it be easier?
I think resourcing remains our biggest challenge, and the level of resourcing at a staff level that we have for this work program. So I'm working full-time on this, and I know HDC with Graham, is a full-time position, recognising that there are other things we do within this work. But I think that would be, is that from your perspective, one of the biggest challenges we have?
Thank you, through the chair. I'd agree with that. And from our perspective, a clear endorsement from this table that this is the number one priority, and to be able to move on with it will certainly set the direction for us as a TAG to get on with it, basically.
And just to follow up on that, then you do talk about needing further feedback around scale and scope. How do we do that before you actually put the final options? Like, if we're going to wait till a November committee meeting to adopt the terms of reference to make this work happen, how do we make sure that we have those conversations about scale and scope before we get to November?
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just going to take even longer. So is there some work that we can do away from the table in preparing that from a governance perspective to support you?
Thank you. Through the chair, that I think that can be captured through the work that's already underway around the scoping of the user needs. So really what we're trying to get through those conversations is understanding where people's priorities are, like how they would like to use this work, their initial understanding of where gaps are, because that will really inform, I guess, when we say scope and scale, from my perspective, that it's really around how big do you want to make this first one is probably the question, and that's where I'd like to think we could come back to you in November with some options for, if for example, I know that that guidance sets out a process, but there are options to do less, I guess, and just accept that there are limitations then for the first risk assessment. So I guess an example of that is how broad do you want to go with your qualitative information? So that qualitative, and it's probably a piece that not between now and November I can see as a challenge, but over the longer term I can see being a challenge, and that we know there is a lot happening in this space, and that's probably the other piece is, it can be quite challenging to get a line of sight across all our different organisations about where this work is happening, because it does cut across many areas of our organisations. So there's work for us to do there particularly, but
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought it might be quite a good opportunity to introduce Tom, if you'd like to count up, Tom. So we have engaged Tom to start that initial conversation with councils and PSGEs and others. So we've asked Tom to go out and ask an engineer, a consent planner, a policy planner in each of the councils, what would you use this information, how would you use a risk assessment, what data do you have, what gaps have you got to start that user case. So if you haven't heard from Tom already, you will soon. He is going to reach out both to practitioners and to governors to some degree. Yeah. And PSG.
Oh, we're ready to answer those questions. So as soon as he's ready to ask them, we're ready to answer them.
Cool.
Just on that, just conscious this is co-governance, it's not all about us as council. The PSGE reps are just thinking there's going to be a lot of work going on and we need the PSGE input in at essentially a staff level. Is there a way that we can resource or get PSGE staff to work in on this? Is that...
could we pick that up as part of the work program discussion? Because there is a bit in there around the Māori climate action and how we can work together on that. So I think
For
this
the
work,
risk assessment though?
yeah, this work fits within that. Like we want to make sure we're kind of looking across the whole work program, and kind of the ways that we want to work together and through our Māori partnership teams as well, just so we're not kind of looking at one little part of it and not taking a broader view. So.
Okay. Oh yeah, Councillor Ack.
I'm just curious, and I might be jumping ahead way too far here, but on your slide with hazards and the one with the hazards and stuff in it, that one,
Yep.
is that sort of set in framework what this report's going to be looking at going forward, or do you want a bit more direction from this group on exactly what we would like to see in the initial report and the more high level, or?
Yeah, so I think to answer that, there is, like I said, there is that guidance that generally looks at the process for how you assess risk, where there's an opportunity for the committee to really, I guess, drive and influence how the first risk assessment shapes out is around the different types of domains. So they vary quite significantly across risk assessments, depending on different areas and like the types of, I guess, the breakdown, like how do you want to break it down if you think of it kind of almost by subject area or so I know, for example, some regions have looked at like agricultural risks really specifically and then broken risks down within that, and it's around what you want to kind of think of them as buckets.
But it's more from this governance group on what we, in that first assessment, what do we want to see? And how broad a level or how detailed do you want to get down? For example, poor quality homes, for example. We know there's poor quality homes out there. We know that's already there. Do we want to get into that detail, or do we want to be a higher detail where we're looking at the effects of drought, for example?
Yeah.
And what is the economic impact of that? What's the economic impact of a heat wave? Potential economic impact of those in this community, that more higher level than
Yeah.
drilling down into just what's the effect on a home when it's hot. We know it's going to be affected.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, am I pushing
If it's
high
helpful.
or wide?
Yeah, I've got a couple of, right back here, I've got a few, to give you an idea of different ways that it can be, like, for example, different levels of detail that you can try and think of the best one. This is a urban communities one, so it's not the best example, but you can see that, or even if I go back to this one, for example, the table 13.2, then yes, absolutely, there is an ability to, I guess, influence the areas where this joint committee wants to dig into a bit more, I guess, rather than other risks. And it is all dependent on the level of information that we have. So that is probably the other key point there, is that any risk assessment is only going to be as detailed as the level of information that we do have, so.
Yeah, I've got written down how many other reports are out there at the moment, but that's what you've got to look at, and I get that now. So, no, just wondering, like inundation and things like that, is that where we want to be sitting really high level? Or are we going to dig down a wee bit deeper than that? That's, in my personal feeling right now, with the limited time we've got and limited budget, I'd like to see it more high level and, looking at the big picture. And then as we go forward, we can start drilling down into the more detailed on what those risks are. That's just my opinion.
I think I'll just add to that and then pass to Zan. I'm hearing some words from you, Amberley, things like we need confidence about the risks we need robust data, and at the Local Government New Zealand conference that we've just been at, there was almost the opposite sort of flavour coming back at us, and I think there's a real balance in here around, is now the time to get absolute certainty around exactly what the best stuff is, or like, I think in this case, sometimes perfect's going to be the enemy of action.
Oh, absolutely.
And wondering how can we do a risk assessment light to get 80% of the right answer and then start pushing some action. And then we can, it can be iterative and build on as we go, but let's get, just the headlines first. Over to you, Zan.
Well, Chair, I'm just going to swing in behind that view and pick up from where Councillor Aiken left off, that this needs to be high level. I think the paper expresses that you can just chase data endlessly. I think this informs, it's not going to be spatial, it can't be spatial, so therefore it's conceptual, right? So it can be highlighting areas that we either of known risk or uncertainty that can inform further work. The particular, so this is high level conceptual, and so that should be able to be done fairly quickly. We've got models from other regions now, so we don't need to, borrowing one of the staff's expressions, we don't need to boil the ocean to do this. We can get on and do it quickly, and we can refine over time. What I wanted to ask was just around, you say public facing. I just had a quick look at the Canterbury and the Wellington versions. They're not, I wouldn't call them public facing at all. So my challenge is, how can we, one of the most useful things we can do is be talking to the public about what we know and what we don't know, and just general awareness building. So we're going to challenge you and how much of that we can do through this, but also what other things we're missing. I mean, I know we have our own climate hub, so the Regional Council has a climate hub on its on our website. I presume other councils have climate-related information. Are we missing? Could we benefit from a collective in the same way we've had the was it called Life on the Edge or Living on the Edge? There was a lovely, the response to the Hikurangi Trench and the fault line in this coastal areas. Do we want, as a region, to be telling a public story as a region rather than splitting across separate councils? So is there a core of it, and we're going to get to comms part of it, but is that part of where we should be aiming for this trimester, is to be telling a really good story about what we know and just focusing on delivery of information to the public?
Yes. Yeah, I do think that's, like I mentioned, that these can be a tool for communicating. Absolutely hear you that some of those reports are quite technical. There is also some other documents. I know for the Canterbury one, there's like a high level, much more consumable summary report. I think it went to the Merrill Forum that I saw earlier this week. So I think there are, again, options, and part of this is understanding what these different user needs are. And I think that's a real challenge with this work. Like, we do want something that's public facing, it's consumable, because that's how it becomes applicable for a wide range of people. And we need to balance that with, I know what we're hearing from some of the people inside our organisations who perhaps are looking for that more technical level of detail. So I think when we talk about options for scope and scale, that's really what we're meaning there is, that's the choice. And I think, again, coming back to that guidance for the risk assessment process, the first part, like the part that looks at like this, like that's pretty standard. That's how you assess climate risks, that process. But I think I mentioned is that the kind of the second part of it, the how far do you go with, doing engagement and getting those further qualitative inputs. It is possible to do a risk assessment with the first part and not going, I guess, that extra step. That you could still, in a really targeted way, get qualitative inputs in the same way we're doing the user scoping work, but perhaps not do a broader engagement exercise. So that would be an example of another way to do this faster and with some limitations. But I definitely hear you on it being consumable front.
I think if I may add, Madam Chair, I think what you describe as an absolutely critical first step is to be clear about what it is that we understand and what it is that we don't, and be able to share that with the public. But I think the direction that, if this is the way we go, that we'll be seeking from this committee further in time is actually how we want to use this information. And that may vary. Adaptation is very locally based, and that may vary depending on the situation of different districts. I know, speaking from a Central Hawke's Bay perspective, one of the elected member priorities that we've got is around exacerbating our understanding of risk, and a particular focus that we want to put on improving the maturity of our asset management planning, basically, as we head into future long-term plan cycles. That's something that's at a very sort of localised scale. So I think that if we're able to start at a high level and then be able to, over time, to drill down on how we actually use that information, that'll set us up in good stead in terms of the work of this committee over probably the next 3 or 4 years.
Tanya Kerr, and then I'm really keen to hear what our mana whenua groups are thinking. So not to put you on the spot, but we'll go to Tanya first.
I've just been sitting here thinking, how would I answer the question from my ratepayer that says, what are you doing with this money and how am I going to benefit? And if I said it's a risk assessment regarding climate change and adaptation and mitigation, they would probably say, beep, beep. You should know the answers already. I don't know that I would need to do this very formal climate risk assessment process to know what our risks are and to know what the highest priorities are. There may be some jiggling in the fine tuning, but I'm just concerned we're going to be spending, to me, a lot of money creating a report that is going to confirm what, in general, we probably know. I would be more interested in looking at the national climate risk and seeing what we can pull out. There was a quote earlier about perfection getting in the way of progress. Not interested in perfection. I want to know how we can do this quickly, lightly, and create a document so we can get on to the doing. And if we all have to improve our asset management planning, then this committee as a collective can write to the entities and say, you're challenged to do it. So I'm supporting the previous speakers. It sounds like many of the governors are on the same thinking. I see this risk assessment. I'm really interested in what we can do now. We're going to the concentric circles, the overlap of mitigation, adaptation, and preparing for a disaster. What are the things that we can do that will deal with those, address those right now? So when it comes to scale and scope, I think you're getting your answer from your elected members around this table quite clearly.
I suppose what I'm hearing is that the staff would like quite a lot of detail, and you guys are the ones who write the detail of the policy, so I can understand that would be a perspective you'd bring. Elected members, we just want to know where the big priority areas and where we should be putting the big buckets of money and driving the action. From our PSGEs, how do you see this would be helpful? What did you like to see?
Fortunately,
Was that-
PSG rep is Michelle.
Oh, yes. Anyone on our RPC as well? Tai whenua. Tai whenua, thanks.
Well, Wairo's pretty much living it now.
Yeah.
So the sooner you can sort of start actioning something that's really going to make a difference. We're pretty much getting hammered left, right, and centre, and it's impacting our community in a big way. So unless we're going to be brave enough to make changes that are going to make a difference, we're wasting our time. And before, like, you know, I can remember these conversations coming up years back. Sorry, my husband's, yeah, well,
You speak to it if you want to.
Aroha Mai, I just moved back in our house after about 18 months from Cyclone Gabriel, so she's putting up our curtain. So yeah, I don't want to sit around and us just talking to each other and getting nowhere, because I've been in a few of these hui, and it's pretty much I don't see us participating in it much. There's nothing in there really that I can grab as tangata whenua and say, yeah, that's going to make a difference. So yeah, you can write a whole lot of papers, but it's in actions, eh? It's what are you going to do to make the change? Because how we're up to under our arms in water at least once a year now. Our people are being made homeless by climate change, you know, and could be decisions of people, you know, when it comes to the mouth opening. So and I'm not laying the blame on anybody at the moment because it hasn't been proven, but you know, like I can't make it any plainer than we need to get our East together and put this into action. Because quite frankly, I think Wairo's sick of it. We're getting hiding. Our community suffering because of it, and the action needs to happen now. Not take 6 months to write a paper. We'll discuss that, and nothing more happens. So I'm just speaking reality here. So on behalf of our community, kia ora.
Kia ora, Michelle.
Nice, Michelle.
Any other feedback on this?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the report today asks us to receive and note the climate change risk assessment staff report. I'm happy to move that recommendation, but I think we need to add commentary or another recommendation that asks for work to be done very quickly on scope and scale, and to be reported back to us. And even if we somehow can approve scope and scale via email or an online meeting, I don't want to wait to the next meeting before we get into the doing. We heard really clearly from Michelle, writing this document isn't going to make any difference to her community. So we need to get on to the doing, and I don't want to mix up the doing with this report, because this is about the risk assessment. So if that's okay, I'll move that we receive and note the risk assessment staff report and request information scope and scale be brought back to us as soon as possible.
That email. And just on that, we're going to do the work program next paper, so we can round out that conversation then.
Thanks.
Yes, and I think just to add in, one of the key things that we need to get right up in front is who are our key groups and how we're going to input that. And I suppose it's tricky, isn't it? Because we want the high level, and sometimes you need the detail to get the high level. But in order to get that that scoping and who our user groups are, that's a lot of relationship building stuff, and that takes a lot of time. So from that, I've got the empathy for there around the long building, but then also we want the short stuff as well. So it's that tricky balance, and I'm wondering if there is a hybrid option that we can do a risk assessment light short term and then do that long-term stuff, but just throw that in there. So we've had a motion be put. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Aitken. Any further discussion?
Just one question from me. What is the time frame for this risk assessment? Is it 1 year, 6 years, 25 years, 100 years? I apologise if it's in the paper and I missed it.
It's not in the paper, but I think I think we need to do a little bit more work to understand what the other regions who have gone before us, what type of time period they're looking at. And I think, again, it might depend a little bit on the level of detail we go to in this first one as well.
I think if I can just add, they're usually iterative processes. So the first one will be at a certain level and might be done reasonably quickly, as we've discussed here. But there's always the ability to build on that as new information becomes available and as directions provided. So there's no set period for them.
Was that the question, how quickly, frequently you review them, or was it, what was the horizon?
Yeah, what's the horizon? Are we looking at all of the risks that could come our way in 100 years? If so, the document will be very complex and quite unsure. Whereas if we did it, what are the risks in the next 5 years, it would be a more concise document and the risks would be more clearly known. So just understanding, once again, the scale, that horizon.
Because I think the example that Amberley showed of the Canterbury regions one, that had,
This one,
it looked out to 2100.
but that's a choice.
It had two steps, a medium term and a long term, and it used two scenarios for the longer term. So all those are kind of essential building blocks when we're scoping the first one.
Thank you.
And I'll break procedure myself and ask another question if that's all right. Just wondering, in our very first meeting of this committee, we had a presentation on a piece of software that was going to replace the hazard portal, and it presented the data out with the effects of climate change. How does that relate to this?
Good question.
I'm happy to take that. Seriously, what you're referring to is the presentation from Urban Intelligence. They're based out of Christchurch, and Dr. Tom Logan leads a lot of that work, and their Risk Explorer tool. So we currently, this is a tool, it's a spatial tool, and at the moment, that tool, it's an excellent tool for this, right? And the way that, I know, Zed, you mentioned some of these reports aren't as user-friendly, perhaps, as like a spatial tool that's a mapping like that. And there isn't any other tools really in the market out there like it. At the moment, and it is a risk assessment, at the moment, it's not able to be in the form that they have developed it, public-facing, in the way that a risk assessment is. And I think at a high level, there's some reasons for that around the assumptions they make haven't been tested, and partly because when you put it on a spatial platform like that, it goes down to a property level detail, and that can have quite wide-ranging implications, which like Urban Intelligence would not be prepared to put that out there, for example. They are working on a version of that spatial tool and it's not ready yet, but they're working on developing a version that could be used in a public-facing way. So I believe that involves, I guess, lifting up on some of the level of information there. And so that is one of the options when we say we're looking at some options, that is one of the options that we will look at. And we need to have some further conversations with them about what are your timeframes, like what does this look like? And I would say a lot of that work has been driven by the likes of Christchurch City Council, who have been using their Urban Intelligence tool and they've built it with feedback from them. I guess on that too, several councils, including ourselves, currently do have access to this tool, and we can use it in particular settings. For example, an engagement to help tell the stories of what the risk looks like, because you can layer risks on top of each other and you can see it, and it is great for being able to tell that story. But Yeah, so we will look into it more as an option, as part of understanding what the options are for this work. But I would say in the short term, they don't have a public-facing document. So I know Nelson Tasman are working with Urban Intelligence, but they are looking at also drawing down the information in the Urban Intelligence tool and putting it into a report. So in that sense, you can think of them at this stage as another, I guess, provider of a risk assessment process.
There we are. We have an annual we've gone into a contract with them for a year. Hawke's Bay Regional Council is paying for that at the moment, so that we can explore that further and how we can use that to either in decision-making without it being publicly available, or as an input into a publicly available climate risk assessment. But we do like that tool, and we think there's a lot of opportunity there. We just working to optimise that at the moment.
Okay. And if I can add to that, that is consistent with, there are a number of councils across New Zealand who are using that tool in that particular way. Everyone has the same constraints with the way that tool can be used at the moment. So yeah, I guess the next step for being able to use that particular tool does need to come from Urban Intelligence as the developers of it.
Sorry, we got out of questions, but
We'll skip back. Yep.
when it comes to the scoping and user requirements, are we including public? Because, I mean, the point's obvious, but we're doing all this to protect the public and inform the public. But this is basically a back of house kind of document primarily. We turn it around and just wonder what scope there is as part of this to think, well, what's the best information that we could be providing now-ish to the public? What are we missing stories that we could tell, or ways in which you could present information? And spatial is great, but as you say, but in fact, you draw a hard line and lawyers turn up magically. Is there a way that we can bridge that? But anyway, and my challenge is, what do we want to be telling the public? What's missing? So
Yeah.
it would be nice to at least be able to answer as part of the scoping, even if it's a separate job of work.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the same lines and just throwing it out there for thought. It's got to be digestible for the public, and it needs to be something that can drive action, so it needs to be quite concise. So is it as simple as these are the top 5 risks that are affecting Hawke's Bay? And like the absolute nth degree detail of what is the likelihood and the consequences and everything coming out of that, is that needed before we start mitigating the risks? Do we need all that information, or do we just go, I don't know what they are, but like drought, tsunami, whatever they are, like, I don't know, for conversation.
Can I address the elephant in the room?
Please.
What about the people of Eastview, Bayview, Tongoio? You don't need to ask them what the risks are, they know the risks.
Yeah.
You know, it's as plain as simple. And if we got another flood tomorrow, we're just getting over this one. I feel like I'm sort of sitting here doing nothing because this conversation is going nowhere. Sorry about having to say that, but that's how I feel. I'm a Wairau person, and I'm talking about your local here. I was in Bayview and got flooded out there. So, you know, and that place hasn't recovered. Those 2 marae out there are just devastated. So you ask them what the risks are. It's going to rain, it's going to flood, we're going to get wasted.
Affects the time.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry to the skill over here, because she's working hard to get this report done. But I think she's flogging a dead horse, honestly. Kieran.
Kia ora. Councillor
Through the
Hardy.
Chair, I'd say to Paul, it's a great challenge for us. However, as staff pointed out, this is only, flood, too much water is only one risk. It's only one of a number of risks too little water is a risk that we're familiar with in other years. And so the beauty of doing some kind of an overall risk assessment is that you don't miss something out. And that's, our challenge is to proportion things, make sure we haven't missed something that we regret later on, and then have unsound planning. But we don't want to overdo this. We want to do it quick and move on. Thank you.
Get into the doing.
Okay. Any final thoughts? Well, we'll put the motion now. So we've got motioner and a seconder. Do you want to read out what you had again, or can you read out what we've got?
What did I say?
So I've got that the Climate Action Joint Committee receives and notes blah report, staff report, and requests information from the HBRC to do work on scope and scale for the next Climate Action Joint Committee.
No, I needed ASAP in there.
Sure.
The scale and scope to be reported back to us as soon as possible.
Yep.
What did I say in HBRC?
Maybe it's tag.
Yes. Yeah, take,
Is it tag? And can we just get an indication, do we have any idea about what is appropriate in terms of when you'd be able to come back to us with that first bit?
I think in the first, short answer is no, because in the first instance, I think we need to go have some conversations with some other people who have done this work as well around them. We've got lots of good connections around the country to do that, to understand like what could a risk assessment look like? What are some ways that we could do this faster and at a higher level of detail? So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Fast and light and high level. So we can then move on to the doing.
Yeah. And I suppose if you do see benefit in us doing that more detailed, because I'm thinking for our infrastructure plans and for some of our other work, it might be helpful to do that as well. I don't know, just if we can have that feedback. If there's a light and a long term. Yeah. Okay. With that, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, the Regional Action Work Programme and update.
I think Emily's going to run us through this one herself.
Brilliant, thank you.
We've got wildfire.
apologies, a few things may be a little bit out of order as we were intending to do this one first. So where there may be duplication with the risk assessment, I will just try to skip past it. So the purpose of this item is to present a one-year climate action work programme for the Joint Committee's endorsement. And firstly, we'd like to acknowledge the work that you've done to date, including the vision and strategy work. The paper for this item also notes the total budget that has been confirmed to date for this work programme over the next 3 years. And the paper also notes that there have been several changes in council staff who are either dedicated or supporting resources for this work programme. While this has meant that in 2024 progress has been a little bit slower than we would have liked, we're here today with this work programme that's been designed to, use this phrase again, set us up for success, both for the rest of the triennium and beyond. So we're looking to, build momentum while also moving at pace, and I think we've just heard that through the discussion as well. With that in mind, we did think it was quite helpful to kind of situate the work that you are doing within the wider context. There has been quite a lot of change as well in the recent months around work programs, and I think really the key thing to take here is that we've developed a work program that's organised into 4 overarching work streams, and I will give a brief overview of those in a moment. But there are connections between the work here of the Climate Action Joint Committee, as you all well know, and several work streams, particularly at a regional scale, that have been progressed outside of this work stream. So they may not be within the direct remit of this committee, but they are quite critical to achieving our climate goals and targets, whether that be for emissions reduction or adaptation. So I think the real challenge there for us and opportunity as well is how can we think about those connections and the work that we do as officials and for yourselves as well in the various hats that you wear and the committees that you're in. But I think here with this work program, the work of this committee, particularly with its regional scope, has the potential to really support and reinforce the need for both a climate lens and climate action across these other work streams. So the work program that we're seeking endorsement of today is focused on progressing work over the next year. We would look to do a longer term work program once we have got some momentum on this one. Obviously, we're just keen to get the endorsement from you first before we do that. Work has been prioritised and sequenced across those 4 work streams, recognising the resourcing at a staff level that is available to support this as well. So, at a quick overview of each of the work streams, like work stream 1 is really focused on the development of the risk assessment and more broadly our climate data and information and where those gaps are. We've talked a lot about that today already. Work stream 2, this is quite outwards facing. It's focused on areas where the committee can advocate, where you can lean in and support climate action to drive it out there in our communities. And within that, there is a work stream around Māori climate action, which I can talk to more in a moment. Work stream 3, community awareness and knowledge building. Look, we all know that communicating and engaging with our communities is a critical enabler of climate action, but it's also really essential to support the work that's being carried out across all the work streams here. So to your point earlier around how does the potential engagement for the risk assessment fit in? Well, we want to make sure that if we are looking at going out and doing engagement as part of this work, that we're taking a really coordinated approach to it, also in light of everything else that's going on. The work stream is designed so that it all speaks to each other in that sense. Work stream 4 looks both outwards and inwards. It's a really big opportunity through this work stream to show climate leadership and ensure that as a region we're making the necessary progress to meet our goals and targets. I'm just going to briefly touch on the other 2 slides that are in your pack there. So these are the 4 overarching work streams that I've just gone over. They are designed to be complementary and reinforcing of each other. And the work program also reflects the importance of progressing climate action across the board. We have heard from this joint committee around and throughout long-term plans as well about the priority for adaptation, but the intent is for the work program to have something in there for everyone, so there is both mitigation and adaptation work within it. So very quickly, the paper, the attachment 1 for this paper also includes the detailed work program and the committee's governance touch points, which we're able to update as well following this meeting. Just very quickly, wanted to talk to the confirmed funding for climate action. So the Joint Committee previously agreed to recommend partner councils to provide funding through the LTPs. We have some confirmed funding, so around 610,000 over the next 3 years. We do expect the majority of this funding to be allocated to Workstream 1 and the development of the regional risk assessment, but the pace of the decisions that we take with that work stream will determine where the costs fall over that period. And I think as part of these conversations that we've just had around scope and scale and the light option or the detailed option, within that we would expect to be able to come back with a better idea of costings for that. And I just wanted to speak to this particularly. There is under Workstream 2 contestable funding for climate action. One area that we did want direction from the Joint Committee on is this contestable funding, as this will influence the budget that's available for the risk assessment work, and where you see this best fitting, I guess, within the 3-year work program overall. Obviously, at the last meeting, there was some discussion of an itemised budget, but that wasn't taken forward. So we do recognise that, particularly from a reducing emissions perspective, the impact of funding grassroots climate action can be small, but it has been included in the work program as members of the committee have previously indicated support for it. It's also an excellent way of empowering our communities to take climate action and enabling local climate action, which is the purpose of that work stream. It's also a really good opportunity, and we talked before about how do we tell the stories about the action that is happening and the work that has been done. So it's an opportunity to bring visibility to the work that has been taken out there in our community. At this stage, our initial thinking would be to partner with a local organisation that has an existing contestable fund to minimise, I guess, the work that is required from officials to do this. And we would suggest that we start off small as well, but I might just pause there. I do have a slide on Māori climate action I would like to talk to, but I'm conscious that I could either keep going or I can pause there.
Yeah, keep going.
Keep going?
That'd be great.
Cool. Supporting Māori climate action, you'll see as well that there is a dedicated work stream to supporting Māori climate action within this work program. Our proposed approach for this work stream is to work with our Māori partnership teams within councils in the first instance and engage with our PSGE and Māori committee representatives on the joint committee to design a work stream that goes beyond just this first year. I would say too, it's intended to capture, we wanted to ensure that there was a dedicated space for Māori climate action within this work program, but that it is intended to capture the work that is happening across the work streams. So if you refer to the detailed work program, there are aspects of this that sit across the different work programs. So for example, proposing an iwi Māori specific engagement plan to support these work streams, which may be broader than, say, the risk assessment engagement. But we would want to make sure that we were taking a really coordinated approach to that. And in that sense, also, the Māori climate action work stream could be thought of as running vertically across the work streams due to this crossover. And we also are really committed to bringing a Te Ao Māori perspective to all the work that's happening in this work program. So I guess that was one thing we did want to highlight, and that at officials level we are working together to do that. What's there?
Go on.
Happy to take questions.
We've got some questions. Councillor Harding.
I've got a question. Thank you, Chair. I've got a question that's really directed at my colleagues around the table. So we've got a budget which is put together with the presumption that Workstream 1 would take most of the cost. We want to do that light and quick. I want to know what the appetite is for particularly Workstream 2 and 3. And I think it would be useful, from my point of view, to have a sense of other councils and other committee members' views on the gaps that we could fill in climate action and in the knowledge building. So in my head, it looks like a quick Google poll around saying, what's the weighting? How much of our budget would you like to put in these different areas? That's one way of answering the question. But anyway, I'm curious to know how you feel about gaps in sponsoring climate action on a local scale and informing the public about climate action. Thank you, Chair.
I'll go. So as the council that per head of population is paying the most into this fund, there's not enough in this fund, in my view, to be sponsoring large levels of community action. We already have environment and sustainability funds available at a local level. We support groups like Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, and I think it would be a double up of resources already there. I understand the idea that it's supporting visible action, but the reality is we don't yet have a common basis understanding evidence on where is the most appropriate place to act yet. So yes, while we might take a first step light lens to the risk assessment, the reality is the next step, which deep dives in some areas, is going to happen pretty quick smart after the first step. The thing being, we need to get the first step done to give us the best guidance on where to focus first, and then we can look at it. But the biggest thing that we need to see, from my perspective, is how we're directing our big investment when it comes to mitigation and adaptation in the region, and not the small investment, because that's not necessarily going to serve the way that our organisations have to interact with this work.
If I can answer, I'm not concerned that we need to spend the 600 odd K if we get to the end of the first year, second year. I'm quite happy to leave that in the bank as such. I agree with Mayor Alex. We can do little things and actually not achieve the big things that we're set out to do. Just going back to some of the learning that we had at the local government conference, one thing I would like to say that came across really strongly is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. All of the answers are already out there. And in our procurement, we need to make sure we're buying off-the-shelf solutions, that any investments that we do, be it investigations, knowledge, enabling, it is leveraging other work that's happening. And there will be projects that pop up that will require us to sponsor them, to put our shoulder to the mill, but I don't think we necessarily put aside the money now to do a community fund. It may pop up later, but right now I'm not sure we have the answers yet, which is a bit ironic, having said I don't want a deep, dark dive into a big risk assessment plan. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Kia ora. Ros, you've got your hand up.
Kia ora koutou. You might see that Wairau District Council is not part of the approved funding at this stage. It's something that obviously with the second lot of floods that we've had, it hasn't been a priority to discuss in our council table, but we are bringing it up tomorrow. One of the things that we look at percentage-wise is that we've put Wairau at 11%, and if it was a population ratio, our percentage would be 4.9%, which would be a fairer contribution from our district. And a little bit in agreement with Michelle, like it's really important for us in our district that we get some really good actions from this group, and a constructive that we can take forward for us to sort of see the value in putting money into it. The work stream 3, you've got community awareness and knowledge building. Like for us, it would be like how to make our communities more resilient and sustainable, and having some really, practical ways that they can do that individually and collectively. So I see the value in it, but I think it needs to be a bigger picture sort of projects rather than smaller individual ones. Kia ora.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So based on the conversation we had earlier about the risk assessment, when you look at the work program on page 18, it's page 18 written on the page, that one that's up there. Can we look at rephasing some of those boxes at the very top there about where it's got confirm approach to risk assessment is not till the back end of Q1 next year? Can we get an arrow and drag that one forward?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, definitely.
From the
I think
feedback
in light
from
of the
today?
conversation we've had today, yes, we
Awesome,
can
thank you.
update that work stream 1.
Yeah.
I also like what Councillor Kerr said about the off the shelf. There's quite a lot of work that's happening around the country on this stuff. And even when you look at the National Risk Assessment, there's a 3-phase thing that they've used when they did the national one too. So we're not asking something that is odd.
Further question from me, please?
Yes.
Work stream 3, once again, this document. Develop comms and engagement plan for the Climate Action Work Programme. I'm just trying to understand what we're actually going to be having a conversation with our community about this early on. Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's sitting in the right place or that needs to come after.
Through the chair, can I respond?
Yes, absolutely.
I think part of the thinking there is, and this is the I guess, detailed officials part, is that we're really conscious that for our communities, particularly those who are already experiencing the impacts of climate change, they don't necessarily see the work that is happening across our region through different committees and different organisations. Like, it's all climate work, right? And so I think for us, and there is a bit of work for us to do to help support the work of this committee, to really understand the work that is happening across our own organisations. So that's partly what that is intended to do, and it's more for us. So for example, we wouldn't want to, while we're progressing risk assessment work and we're working in our lane and thinking about a comms and engagement plan for say like the release of a risk assessment, that we'd want to have a really good understanding about what other work is happening out there. For example, like a lot of the flood protection work that's happening through the Hawke's Bay Regional Council at the moment, and our broader recovery work. I guess there's what is that story that we're telling our communities, and making sure we've got a really cohesive, coordinated approach to how and when we are communicating with our communities about the work that is doing. And yeah, I think it's intended to reflect that we know there is a lot of work happening that may not be in the direct remit of this committee, but we wanted it captured.
Can I just make a comment? If we are, it's really important we're doing it for the benefit of the community, not because we want to tell them something. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but the last thing I would want to do is to go into the Esk Valley and tell them that we're really good because we're doing a risk assessment. That would just not be appropriate, and it's been raised. So we need to be thinking about why we're telling the story and how it benefits the local community, not just because we want to say, aren't we clever?
Roz, I see you've still got your hand up. Is that a hangover from before, or is that another question?
No, it's just from before. Thank you.
I think, oh, yep.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think we need to remove the word risk assessment. I think that's where we're getting caught up. So if you come to anyone flooded and you say, we're going to do a risk assessment, I'm like, I can show you the risks. Welcome to the club. So I think if we take some of the words that we're used to using, we might look at this slightly more holistically and not so damaged and emotional. So for the communities, I'm not saying just around this table for us, but a lot of us around the table are damaged from it all anyway. So risk is so triggering. So what you're doing with climate action is phenomenal. I mean, 2 weeks before the cyclone, I was getting information from FENZ that we were about to pretty much go into fire season and we were in trouble that way, and then boom, cyclone to the face. So that changed tact. But I think it's our wording. So if we take away risk assessment, we're changing our entire thought pattern and how we can proceed in a better manner.
Nice. I think I'm struggling with this a little bit because I can totally see the value of all of the detailed impact work that you're talking about with the risk assessment. And then I keep thinking, this is a climate action committee. So what do we as a committee need for this? And I suppose for us, we need it as a prioritisation tool. We want to be able to go, these are where it's important for Hawke's Bay to be putting lots of effort right now. Understanding that councils, mana whenua groups are already putting lots of effort into lots of places, but for us it's about where do we need to make the biggest bits of effort going forward. I'm also then conscious that in our terms of reference, we've got that we're going to oversee this piece of work. And that I think, Alex, you said it at the start, like this is a no-brainer, it just needs to be done. And so I suppose, yeah, I'm struggling with those two concepts at the same time and not really sure where to take it, to be honest. But yeah, just throwing that out there for conversation. Tanya?
My notes about what we, the region, need to do is we want to remove barriers to things that allow people to get on and make a difference. we as local government need to make sure that our asset management plans are aligning with whatever adaptation is. So obviously bridges, taller, less piers, I mean, the logical things we know. But there will be other adaptations that councils need to do. And as I said before, off-the-shelf solutions. And there will be things that we can just go and buy. And one that sprung to mind was having community-owned power banks in the city. Because if a city's without power, not everybody's going to go out and start up their electric car to charge their phone. So there will be projects that bubble up. And I do appreciate climate action. We're here to do. And I know we've got to understand where we're at and what the gaps are, but then we need to get in and encourage, endorse, support, make the doing happen.
So what I'm hearing is that the risk assessment is important. We need it to be able to do that prioritisation, and particularly for those asset management plans, we do need it in quite a lot of detail. It kind of comes down to our appetite to wait for the detail, really. And yeah, I'm hearing that we're impatient. But yeah, I don't know, if staff got any?
Madam Chair, I suggest that it's actually about phases, and where you start with the funnel is really big. So the first cut of the risk assessment work is quite broad and it's high level, and then from there it gives us a sense of then the next level to drill down to in terms of action, but also in terms of further assessment. So it's not necessarily about either or, it's actually just about if we can take a high level approach, we can go a bit quicker to then prioritise and move into the next phases.
Yeah, brilliant. And do we have an idea around when we want phase 1 to be achieved by? Because this is what we're sitting right now, the timeline. Is the meeting in March for a light? Is that what we want? And then I suppose the second question is that doable? What do you want to do as the doable first?
I don't know, is the answer.
Yeah.
Chair, I think staff have told us that really they can't answer that today. They've got to
Okay.
go away, but, I think it's for the two of us to work with staff to make
Okay.
things go faster and
Yep.
more streamlined.
Rightio. So we're talking about 2 phases here. Okay. Happy with that?
We could, though, to reflect the discussion that we've had today, and so we could get to a point where we do have endorsement of this, is adjust that work stream 1 with perhaps some broader phase 1, phase 2, and perhaps just lift up a level, and as we can leave it there for now, and then as we do the scoping work and these conversations that, been asked to progress at pace, we can adjust from there.
Okay, brilliant. I think that's that put to bed then for phase 1. Ros?
Yeah, I just thought with the risk assessment, what would be quite good is that if we had just a thing of data that just shows us the reality and also the likely change. So we actually have some hardcore examples, whether it is with agriculture, housing, that sort of thing. So we can actually start to put it into a more practical sense.
Yeah. Yeah, because what we want once we've got phase 1 is a list of actions that we could possibly take, right? And then things that we can advocate to happen. Okay.
Yeah. And put some actions that actually seem tangible.
Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of workstream 2, you'll note that we've got a paper coming later. Just wanting to hear from the committee what their thoughts are around how we're going to drive, how you want this to drive action in this space. Are we advocating for stuff? So one option is to come up with a climate action plan. And the other is to do essentially like a long list of all of the great things that we could do within our sectors. So, we've got our 6 PO that we have developed through previous meetings. What if we went out to say the agriculture sector as one of our PO and said, what is your long list of all of the opportunities of things that we could do to reduce climate action? And then we give staff the ability, some criteria that they assess that long list against, that shortlist comes back to us and we go, right, we're going to pick this top one and we're going to lend the mana of this committee to advocate for this thing to happen, to get that into regional deals, to try and remove barriers, and to set up, I don't know, a group of passionate people that want to do something in the agriculture sector. And then for those who are wanting to do something in another sector, to have little working groups on each of those. So someone might want to work on biodiversity, someone might want to work on waste, to work on those things in smaller groups and then come back to each of our meetings and to report on what we've been able to achieve during the quarter. How does that sound for driving that climate action? Because at the moment we have a list of options in the following paper. But
Short version from me, I don't necessarily agree with all of these short options. I'd be interested in the why they got there, how they got there. So that means I'd like to be involved in that piece. And yes, I would be prepared to work with a team, staff, governors, working together, trying to unpick what we can do.
Okay.
And if I just use an example, I can't read it, but I think it's biodiversity, large-scale deer fencing. I just know the cost and total impracticalities of doing this on a large scale. There may be other solutions. The fact that deer are a problem, but this may not be the answer. So, yes, I'd like to be involved and get a greater long list and be part of working up to the prickly pieces that we can work on.
Should we talk about that?
And through you, Madam Chair, this is where I acknowledge my conflict. Under can't read it, I think it says primary sector. It speaks of the carbon positive project, regenerating carbon soil. That's where my conflict sits because the trust that I'm part of runs that. So I must not comment on it.
okay.
And my friends, Anne.
So I suppose it's just throwing that out there because we're looking at the timeline of it. Is there any other questions on the work program that we have in front of us or any amendments we'd like to make? Other than those.
Chair, look, just picking up on the point about working with the PO, I think that's good. I think that any effort that we put into developing networks amongst those key sectors, basically just working with the willing, is valuable. And if that's around a community fund or any other carrot or mechanism, then I'm all for it. Or we can't fund anything major. We can't fund more than a couple of kilometres of deer fencing. But what we can do is talk and influence and build understanding and a feeling of empowerment. So, and I think we should do it through that route of the PO that we've developed, so that work's not wasted. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Councillor Kerr.
I'm just looking at the recommendations for the work program. So we've been asked to receive and consider the work program and funding update, staff report, and we're being asked to endorse the climate action work program. I'm happy to move those recommendations as long as I have comfort that the staff are able to change the timing of these boxes as we've discussed. I don't need to get into the details and the recommendations that say specifically that's moved to there and that's moved to there. As long as staff are happy, and I see nodding, that massaging that we're doing, because my comments certainly are not meant to be critical, they're meant to extract better out. So I'm happy to move those recommendations.
Something like subject to the changes as discussed today.
Yep. Yeah. So if we have the two recommendations in front of us, receive and consider the work program and funding update staff report, and endorse the climate action work program, September 24 to October 25, subject to the subject to the changes
Discuss today?
discussed today. Okay, brilliant, we have a mover. Do we have a seconder? Mayor Walker. Do you want to discuss it any further? Okay, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? Carried. And, yes, please. Can we have a cup of tea and a recharge after some pretty heavy conversations? We'll be back in,
We're going to break now?
yeah, so it's only, yeah, 4 o'clock? Yeah, we'll be back at 4 o'clock.
Lovely,
Thank you. Go. Right, tēnā koutou katoa, welcome back. And I'm just going to hand straight on to item number 7, which is the update on key national work programs on climate change. And handing straight over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Welcome.
I'm Gavin Ide. I'm with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and the Policy Planning Team. So a bit of a change up here at the front. You're hearing my voice briefly, and then back to Amberley for the next couple of items. Look, this item is an information one. I think as Councillor Kerr sort of referenced, we don't need to reinvent wheels. There are various other entities and agencies doing a whole lot of climate change related mahi up and down the country. So this particular item touches on some of the key things, not everything, but some of the key things that central government agencies are doing in relation to climate change emission management and or climate change adaptation actions. Now, I can't take any credit for this diagram that's on your screen now, but Amberley pulled this one together. Just as a picture's worth 1,000 words, there are various entities, agencies, individuals, portfolios that are working in this climate change action space, and they all have different interrelationships. Here's just a handful of them. So down in Wellington and elsewhere, we have the ministers in Cabinet that have particular key roles. Obviously, there is a Minister of Climate Change, and that's the Honourable Simon Watts. I won't go through the entire list, but there's a handful of them there. They collectively together build a bit of a government work program, and in recent times they've come up with a government climate strategy, which is outlined in this paper. There's also various other ministries, government departments that sort of put shoulder to the wheel and do climate change related work, either directly or indirectly as part of their activities and operations. Minister of Climate Change has a good lead hand in work with Ministry for the Environment. Ministry for the Environment sort of has a foot in two camps in the the emissions reduction kind of action space, and also the climate adaptation action space. Outside of government and outside of ministers, there's an independent entity called the Climate Change Commission, and they provide independent advice to government or to ministers on particular pieces of work. And again, this item highlights a couple of their key pieces of work that's emerged in the last 3 to 6 months or so. Then, also on top of the Climate Change Commission, there's other government or Crown entities. One that used to be known as the Earthquake Commission is now called used to be called the EQC, is now called the Natural Hazards Commission. So they've got some new extra superpowers through changes of legislation that came into effect on the 1st of July, I think it was. So, quite a busy picture. Wicked web of relationships and advice exchanges, and also national directives coming from government to ministers. And this paper that's in front of you is just an attempt to try and highlight some of the key things that's happening and being done by some of these entities. First page is around the Climate Change Commission activity. I'll take much of this as read, so I won't walk you through it.
Yep.
Second one is around a package of work really being led out of Ministry for the Environment around climate change adaptation. And one important thing to note at the bottom of that page, which I don't have a page number on, 31 I think, is
31.
The important date was for the Finance and Expenditure Committee to report back to Parliament on the 5th of September. That has now been extended to the 1st of October. And then the last package of work is around National Emissions Reduction Plan. And as of yesterday, I do want to highlight that the Hawke's Bay Regional Council did indeed end up filing a submission late yesterday. Yes, yesterday, Sunday. And it was a submission that primarily focused on the Regional Council's Land for Life program, sort of right tree, right place by another word. I have no line of sight as to whether any of the city or district councils or PSGEs submitted on that emissions reduction plan number 2. But if there is any other contributions from around the table, around the room, Feel free to speak up now. Other than that, I'm more than happy to take any questions that might loom out of this paper. And Amberley can field any questions around this relationship.
Brilliant.
I agree.
It was brilliant to get the snapshot, actually. There's a lot of information you've distilled down into these pages, so thank you very much for that. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, firstly, Amberley, I've liked the slides that we've seen today that are not part of our report. Could we please have a copy of them?
Absolutely, yes.
That is really good, understanding how things link together. My question is actually regarding the first update on central government national climate change. And so that's on page 29. And it says the Commission's report makes 9 recommendations, and that was released on the 15th of August. Trying to understand, who are these recommendations for? Are they for Parliament? Are they for the greater worldwide New Zealand? What are the recommendations for?
Chair, to use that diagram that's on your screen, Commission's primary audience is back to the Minister, singular, or Minister's Cabinet to do whatever they choose to. They are recommendations. Now, it's all within ministers and parliamentary powers to say, yes, thank you, and do nothing with it, or yes, thank you, and then run with it at pace.
And if I can add to that, there is set out in the Climate Change Response Act, this is all mandated under legislation, but there is within 6 months, so by the end of this year, the Minister of Climate Change must formally, publicly respond to this. To those recommendations, but as Gavin indicated, to what detail the Minister chooses to respond to it is at their discretion.
Thank you. May I ask another question? Page 31. And this is, it's referring to on 10th July 24th, government released its climate change strategy, and there's 5 pillars. Infrastructures, resilient communities are well prepared, etc. What I'm trying to explore is, how do we protect us as a committee and the organisations that we represent, trundling off in one direction, doing what we think is right, when I see the government brings out, or the Climate Commission brings out recommendations. The government's released its climate change strategy with 5 pillars. Ashley and I touched on it a little bit at the break, but how do we protect ourselves from being left fielded by changes in government policy? So that's my question.
I could have a crack at that.
Okay. Be my guest.
My technical advisory role in the world, there is a network of networks that I operate in, just as much as I'm sure all of you operate in a whole connected network of councillors and post-settlement governance entity relationships that hook into Wellington and various other channels of conversation. So it's about building that situational awareness and sharing that situational awareness, so there is just a reduced risk of being blindsided or being caught flat-footed by something that happens in Wellington. Now, this sort of paper helps illustrate a degree of that situational awareness. There's layers on layers of other intel out there. And those of you who were in attendance at the local government New Zealand conference last week, you would have heard it, seen it firsthand from the Prime Minister and also from the RMA Reform Minister, Minister Chris Bishop, setting out some work program priorities around RMA reform. One of those things he has then further elaborated on in a 1-page letter he sent to all councils, setting out the government's intention to progress national direction, sorry for my reading, decided to progress national direction for natural hazards through a single national policy statement type instrument to be in place by mid-2025. So it's sort of setting up some semi-structured goalposts, and I think it would be foolish for any council just to simply rush in and create this new whiz-bang policy framework under the RMA relating to natural hazards without really being connected into that kind of reform program. We might still act before mid-2025, but at least act with knowledge of what the heck the minister might have in mind. And that can go, that sort of sentiment, I think, can occur at multiple levels around the emissions reduction action portfolio, and the list could go on.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Gavin. That gives me confidence that, like you say, we're working within a network of people that are living and working in this space. And yes, we did get a last week. Thank you very much.
I think if I might add some reflections in there too, I think it makes sense that we are very cognizant of the ecosystem that we're working in and the government direction that's coming there. But I suppose a little bit of the rebellion in me says too, our job is to make decisions by and on behalf of our communities. So as long as we're being led by our people doing solutions that are right for us and following that whole mantra around localism, we also can't lose, because that is our mandate too. So,
Well, thank you. Well said.
anyone got any other questions on this paper? Very comprehensive and really well put together, so thank you very much for that. With that, I'll put a motion. It's almost purely to accept the report. I'll just double check the wording. That the Climate Action Joint Committee receives and notes the update on key national work programs on climate change staff report. The mover in Councillor Monteporto Hendry and seconded by Councillor Aitken. Any discussion? No, brilliant. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Aye. Right. Advocating for climate action initiatives. Who would like to lead us off in this one?
That will be me
Really?
again, sorry.
Right, it's fabulous. Take us away,
No
Emily.
slides for this one. So the purpose of this paper is to provide the Joint Committee with a list of climate action initiatives for its visibility. And the list is intended to support you in your role as advocates for climate action across the region. I would note this list is not intended to be an exhaustive list. We know that there's many other initiatives out there that would likely be well placed to fit within this list. It's a starting point. It's intended to be a living list that we'll look to update, and I guess a starter for discussion today. And that would be our approach moving forward. If this is something that you would like to see more of, that we would look to update this list with any suggestions from yourselves, but also as we know more about other initiatives that are happening out there. And second to that is where members are interested, we propose that you could connect with the TAG members either in your own councils or in any one of us, and we will provide more info where we can. So obviously this is a really high level summary, as I said, of the initiatives that are in there, and where possible connect you with contacts. A lot of these initiatives, and the paper notes that where possible we've tried to stay away from council-led initiatives. This is to give you visibility outside of council and the work that has been led, yes, either at a regional scale or by our community. So with that, happy to take any questions.
Councillor Aitken.
Yeah, I'm interested on this list because I look at it and go, well, it's nice, but what are the cost benefits for this list? And I think Councillor Kerr stepped on it and mentioned it earlier around large-scale deer fencing. As an ex-deer farmer, I fully understand the cost of deer fencing and the benefit of putting a lot of deer fencing up will have. And top of my head, the cost benefit of that would be about zero. So, and these are initiatives run by various people. I'm just querying actually what is the cost benefit of this going forward, and are they actually going to do anything, or are they just nice to haves?
Can I have a go at that?
Absolutely, DJ.
So these are existing initiatives that are being run by other people. So we haven't looked into the cost benefit analysis of them. They really are just to surface them so that you know what's going on under the different PO, and you can sort of lean into them if you're interested, find out more, and use your networks or your ability to unlock open doors, or just lend a hand to those or advocate for those projects that ring a bell with you. Yeah.
Councillor Harding.
Madam Chair, through you to Desi. Look, and I applaud the idea of bringing information to the table for awareness. It's really good, and there are plenty of projects around that people can lend their weight and their enthusiasm to, and I encourage everyone to do that. I see this as a very limited list, but it's a starting point, and I just think we should carry on and try and make it bigger. But also, the point of if we could have, and here's who you contact, then that might save a bit of work. So, let's explore, my suggestion would be let's explore doing this, making it bigger and better, and going through the PO and finding out what's going on. I'm constantly amazed by what's happening in industry, and one of my perennial frustrations is that there's a lack of cross-pollination, that people are so busy in their own worlds that they don't actually realise what their neighbours do, or might know what their neighbours do. And the power of observation and other people's experiences is tremendous. So one cheap and simple thing we can do is exchange information and provide it. So let's build it.
I think I'd just like to reflect on, so we worked with staff around bringing this report through. And I think what you've done is great. I think we're maybe slightly misaligned in terms of really what sort of the purpose of this report is and how we can use it as a committee. So I think my vision for this wasn't just to keep us informed around what's going on. It was about helping us prioritise all of the work that's out there for Hawke's Bay and going, what do we as a committee, what do we want to focus on within each of our 6 PO? So we've got our 6 PO. How can we use the mana of this committee to lend what we've got and to be able to remove barriers under each of those things? And so I think it's brilliant to have what we've got here. I think as we mature this paper going forward, it would be really great to have more of a that community-driven long list, as opposed to like what our staff already know and understand, and then bringing that back to us in a way that we can then, as a committee, choose what elements we want to focus on, and then get out there and advocate for change under each of the different PO. Would that be a appropriate direction for this paper going forward? Tanya?
My thinking is I don't want to overload staff so that they have to go out and find everything to tell us everything.
Yeah.
I think this is an opportunity for staff to tell us what they find exciting and interesting and stimulating and buzzing. So I'd like to hand over this paper to the staff to provide us an update on the PO that they see as relevant to us. And there may be things that we want to ask questions about that might go on next time. But the bit of me that wants to know everything, and then the other bit says I'll never read it all anyway.
I suppose what's in the back of my head is how do we then go from that to driving action as the action committee, rather than it just being about us receiving the information, how are we going to turn it into an action? Tim?
So what you're saying is we look at that list and say, okay, this committee here, this group, what are those that we're prepared to back? Are we prepared to back any financially or by staff or whatever? Is that what we're sort of looking at here instead of, there's a couple of good initiatives in there that I like.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we should be looking at and putting some resources into as a group?
Yeah.
But then that's picking them and creating a hierarchy, and that could create some problems out in the community.
Yes. It's politically challenging, Tanya. Oh, we got Roz online. Hi.
I agree with you, Madam Chair. I think that breaking it down into the 6 PO and starting to sort of feed that information into each of those areas would be a really good, clear way of moving forward. And I think the information can come from staff, it can come from us as in this committee and wherever, and just put that information in, but keep it in those different POs. So we start to sort of get a bit of structure going forward in that area.
Thank you, Roz. And I think having those 6 POs enables us to almost deconflict it, because someone on the committee is going to be really passionate about something in agriculture, and someone in agriculture is going to be really passionate about something in another area. And by doing one in everything, or not spreading ourselves too thin, but by picking a few, we're taking that we're picking off the top. Okay, thanks for that. Any further discussion on this?
Happy to
Sam?
move that we receive it.
Oh, yeah, happy to move?
Happy to second.
Happy to second. Righty-ho. Any further discussion?
A question, if I may. If governors have an idea, a thought, not so much a project, how would staff like that brought to them, if at all? For example, for me, I'm really interested in what are the barriers, apart from financial, to solar, or solar within our city, powering things more solar. To me, it's maybe on new builds, it seems a very logical thing to do. But using that as an example, how would you staff like that bought, and does it need, because I might be the only one excited by it and the rest of the team might go, oh no, that's very nice, but no thanks.
Off the top of my head, we could have a standing item at these meetings where we ask you for those sort of ideas, and then you could give us a steer on whether that's collectively supported, or we're happy for you to email us. This is the other way. And maybe this is the way that we surface it, the vehicle for surfacing it is in climate initiatives, because I can imagine we could go research and find a local example of that, whether it's a provider or a project or the airport's project.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because we are quite keen to use this climate initiatives list. It was actually, we did develop this in response to something that Hayley wanted, so we can, in future iterations, adapt it. But we would look here for presenters. As today we've got Oliver that is speaking to us about biomass. He is one of the initiatives. And in hindsight, I did think actually, forgotten his name, but the man from Plant and Research that came to the March committee, and he talked about apple varieties that they are researching for warmer climates. That's also a really great climate initiative. So it's a really good resource for us to find deputations. So if you tell us you're interested in that, we'll go find a local example, get someone to come and talk to the committee about it.
Thank you.
I think the point is we just got to keep bringing it back to how does that drive some action?
Yes.
So,
Yep.
yeah. Okay. If I remember rightly, we've got a mover and a seconder.
Yep.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, and final paper for the day, the Deputation Regional Energy Transition Accelerator, the RETA program.
Thank you, and I'll just give a brief introduction to our speaker. I think Oliver is with us online. So, yes, wanting to introduce There he is. Hello, Oliver. Oliver Howitt from the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Agency, or Authority rather, ECA. Oliver is a program advisor for the Hawke's Bay Regional Energy Transition Accelerator READER program. READER's focus is on understanding localised opportunities, and they are doing work across the country. Hawke's Bay is one region, but localised opportunities and barriers faced by industry when seeking to reduce emissions from process heat and transition to renewable energy. And we've asked Oliver to present to you today on the work of the READER program to boost and accelerate business decarbonisation within Hawke's Bay, specifically in the use of biomass. So with that, I'll hand over to Oliver.
Kia ora, thank you for that, Amberly. Can everyone hear me okay before I start talking?
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll just try present this thing. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to this forum today. It's really important for us to try spread the word of that this work is trying to address, and hopefully there's some interesting things for you in this committee. What I'll go through for the next 20 minutes-ish is I'll just give a brief intro to ECA and the program just so you've got enough context behind you, and then I'll just jump straight into the insights and recommendations for the Hawke's Bay region. Hopefully you can see the presentation slides. Let me know if not. And also, while I'm presenting, I can't see the room, so Amberly or someone just feel free to interject if there's a question that wants to be addressed or something as I go through it. So really quick, was there something? No, someone else. So just really quickly, ECA, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, Crown agency based in Wellington, and we run lots of funding and research programs centred around our purpose, which is mobilising New Zealanders to be world leaders in clean and clever energy use. And if we look at New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions, from energy, the largest contributors are transport as well as what we call stationary energy, so you're burning stuff and not moving anywhere, and large industrial process heat, which falls under the stats definition of manufacturing and construction, is about 8% of New Zealand's total greenhouse gas emissions, so 6 million tonnes-ish across the motu for that bucket. All right, enough about who I am. So just as a bit of an overview of the energy use and emissions from the region. So AECOM did this work for the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and found that 10% of regional gross emissions come from stationary energy. The Hawke's Bay region over-indexes in agricultural emissions from biogenic methane, which you probably are all aware of. But so the RETA program that I'll talk to you about soon is about addressing the large point sources of stationary fossil fuel use. And we can't talk about process heat without talking about piped gas. So a lot of the stationary energy in the region comes from piped gas, and there's a map there of the piped gas transmission network. So the region as a whole consumes about 2% of New Zealand's total piped fossil gas, and there's one. Hastings is the end of the line for that transmission network that comes through from Palmerston North there. And just being reminiscent of what's happening in the media at the moment with around the gas supply, and so there has been numerous projects to try and increase gas supply recently, and lots of those projects have failed, which has led to adjustments downwards of the availability of gas in New Zealand, and is causing some unintended consequences of some large industrial users shutting down, and also spiking up the cost of electricity, because gas is used to generate electricity. So there's lots of things coming to a head at the moment. But all I'll say about the gas situation is just it's a really good reason for businesses to start planning and start to have a plan now for how are they going to transition to a renewable fuel, recognising that supply is going down, pricing going up, and also alternative sources of gas will be more expensive in future. So now our RETA program. So what do we do? Our RETA program looks at the regional transition to renewable fuels for industrial process heat. So we're only looking at the largest sites within each region, and we run different work streams to try to quantify the regional demand, and then other work streams which look at how these sites could electrify or how they could move to biomass. Is there enough biomass in the region if they were to switch to biomass boilers? Just to note that we were in the Hawke's Bay about 3 weeks ago for the regional stakeholder workshop, and we're in the process now of completing the final integrated report. So that final report for the Hawke's Bay isn't available publicly yet. So the information that you'll see from now on isn't quite finalised, but it's pretty much there, and you guys are getting a first look. So what did we look at? For the Hawke's Bay region, this map just shows the location of these large industrial users that we identified through this study, and also the location of the large electrical infrastructure. So as a baseline for the sites that were in our study, there were 44 sites across meat, industrial and commercial sectors, generating 121 kilotons per annum of CO2 emissions for their process heat.
Just to clarify, Oliver, we're being live streamed. Is this all publicly appropriate material?
Yes, that's fine. It will all get published publicly. And the numbers might change just a little bit in the final version, but that's okay. Yep.
Thank you. Carry on.
So these 44 sites actually consume, close to 90% of the region's total piped gas consumption. So it's very top heavy, the amount of gas that's used in the region. So. And it's not, no surprise that is the majority, the dominant fuel that's used by these sites. There are some that use coal and LPG, and a few that use diesel because they are connected to that pipe gas network. All right. So just really quickly, the way that we try to assess decarbonisation for these industrial sites is for every site, we look at how they can first reduce demand and also use heat pumps to deliver their heat requirements. And that's a really important step because we don't want to replace one unit of fossil fuel with one unit of renewable fuel. We first want to use energy more as efficiently as we can. And so we identify projects that sites can use to first reduce that demand, and then for temperatures under 100 degrees, there are commercially available heat pumps technology now to deliver that heat, and you get that awesome kind of coefficient of performance of around 3 or 4 units of heat delivered for 1 unit of electricity supplied. So those projects are really good to first reduce the infrastructure need where you are to convert the rest of your boilers. And where we're left at is shown by the graph on the far right-hand side. The focus of the rest of the report is these unconfirmed fuel switch decisions. So these are businesses who have not yet made a financial commitment or a plan to move off pipe gas or fossil fuels to a renewable fuel. So we look at the economics for what their options could be. Really quickly, the way that we model the projects for each of these model the economics for each of these projects, is using the marginal abatement cost, which is essentially the net present value of these projects divided by the total emissions reduced when you go to a low emissions fuel. And the reason we do that is because then we can compare the marginal abatement costs with an expectation of future carbon pricing in order to give a indication of the timing or when these projects are likely to be economic. And so the intent of the program is to use economics only as a decision-making criteria for these businesses, but we recognise as well that there are a myriad of other factors that these businesses would consider in their transition to a renewable fuel, which may accelerate some projects or may delay some projects, based on the access to capital or pressures from consumer demands and things like that. So for each low emissions fuel project, we've got, under the hood, we model what is the capital cost of the new boiler and what is the ongoing fuel cost. So if they're moving to electricity, what's the cost of electricity going forward for the 20-year lifetime of that boiler, and similar for biomass. And this is just illustrating what I'm meaning about using the marginal abatement costs to first indicate what the optimal fuel choice could be for each site, and then comparing against a future of carbon pricing, of which there could be many futures, I understand that, and we do display sensitivities around that, against the forecast of marginal abatement costs for the optimal timing. All right. So hopefully that's enough context. I appreciate I'm going very fast, but hopefully enough context to get into the insights out of the program for Hawke's Bay. So there are 51 projects that we identified. So remember, there are only 44 sites, but each site could have multiple, many different projects across demand reduction heat pump and an electric boiler or a biomass boiler. So there are 51 projects that these sites could undertake now that are economic with no carbon price. That just means that they've got a net present value that's negative now. They're all good to go, be invested in right now. And then the graph just shows that there are some with higher marginal abatement costs that may not get triggered until sometime in the future based on our expectation of carbon pricing. And some of the magnitude of those higher priced ones are bigger than what you get in that lower bucket. So that 51 projects that are economic now are predominantly demand reduction and heat pump projects, because the economics are always pretty good for those. Whereas the higher marginal abatement costs are fuel switch projects, which involve replacement of a boiler, and often those have higher abatement costs associated.
Okay.
Is there a question there?
Come back in.
Michelle, you've popped off mute.
All right, so now we can overlay economics for each project with a future timeline. So, and this graph just shows how emissions could be reduced from these industrial process heat sites over time as the price of carbon and price of gas escalates. And the yellow line there for the MAC optimal is the line to look at. So that is our economic criteria when decisions are likely to be made versus BAU. The BAU one locks in financial commitments that have been made already, and then essentially just does nothing until 2050, which isn't very realistic in itself, but just something to compare against. So 1/3 of emissions reductions are economic now, and 2/3 by 2038. However, all of this is underpinned, one of the biggest assumptions in our economic modelling is the price of gas that people are experiencing at their sites. And so when we run the sensitivities over future of gas pricing, a 6% escalator, which is the bottom graph, just sees a lot of projects become economic almost immediately. And we are in that world nowish, based on what's happening in with the spot pricing and contract pricing for piped fossil gas. And you might have been aware in the media of Pan-Pac in the Hawke's Bay talking about their gas pricing going to $39 a gigajoule, which was a doubling, I think, of their previous gas price. And so that bottom line isn't unrealistic at all, in my opinion. And the key insight that we found, so we modelled both moving to electricity and moving to biomass for all large fuel switching projects, and all of the fuel switching projects chose biomass was the economically favoured option for every single fuel switch project, which we haven't had in another region before. And so that's a combination of many factors, including, the ongoing cost of electricity, so how much you're paying for energy plus network charges, compared to the cost of a biomass as your fuel source was a lot lower. And so what we're seeing through the program is that if all of these fuel switch projects occurred, there'll be an additional demand of 230,000 green tonnes per year of biomass material. So then the question must be asked, is that amount of supply available across the Hawke's Bay region? And so we did some analysis to try quantify that. And so it was a top-down versus a bottom-up approach, where we looked at the wood availability forecast across the existing extent of exotic forestry in the Hawke's Bay region, and then we also surveyed all the large wood processors and forest owners in the region about their available volumes and their harvest intents. And so we got a pretty good picture and a detailed picture of how much is being harvested currently and how much material could be diverted to be used for bioenergy. So the end result of that analysis is that there is enough within the region itself to supply the demand from within the region, which is not a picture that happens everywhere that we've seen. So it's a good news story for the region that you could be self-sufficient from gathering residues out of the forest from within your region. What's behind that dotted line there, which shows net residues available, that is only residues that are available from wood processing sites, if they're not already using it, as well as in-forest residues. So that's what's left at the landing or cutover, sometimes called slash. And what we've considered for our analysis is only a portion of that volume, which we've considered to be economically and practically recoverable. So what's actually in forest is higher than that. And I've also put a note there that low-grade export logs could double this as well, which is often been used for bioenergy as the kind of the K-grade or the pulp-grade logs that get shipped from the wharf often to China and are used for bioenergy in China instead. But those low-grade logs aren't in that graph, but could double supply. So everything's indicating that there is definitely enough out there that could supply regional demand.
Oliver, a question from me. Sorry, your previous slide referred to the National Environmental Standard of CF. Is that the same as the plantation forestry?
Yes, the National Environment Standard for Commercial Forestry, I think, is the CF. Yeah, so it's the plantation forestry that the councils have to administer, yes.
Thank you.
Does that also include with the slash the cost of recovery to get it to somewhere to be burned to create the energy? So is that diesel and trucks and everything else that have to cart it?
Absolutely. So the key part of this work stream is to say how much is out there and how much will it cost. And so the slide that I've got there demonstrates that. So you'll see there's a cutover column in there, and so in that cost, in the costing for that material, we have got the cost for harvesting and collection, so all the machinery that goes in there and all the chippers, and transporting it to a hub, and then chipping it and storing it and drying it, and then moving it to the process heat users site. And so all of those costs have been built into the economics, and even then at kind of around $20 per gigajoule, we're still finalising those numbers. Delivered to a process heat user site, we're still seeing those graphs that you saw before of the lots of these projects being economic. Yeah. So yes, definitely assuming that everyone's getting paid to gather this material, it's definitely not free.
Brilliant.
So I think I've just got a couple more slides, and I think the key thing to leave you with today is there is this awesome potential, but more so than other regions, there is a real need for collaboration between both the demand side and the supply side, and the demand and supply side to talk together. And so the reason I say that is that there's no single really big site in the region for process heat that could draw a supply chain out because of their decision to go to biomass. There isn't a Fonterra dairy factory, for example, that would draw out that supply. And so these demand side organisations may have to work together to aggregate their demand and their timing and intentions in order to be of a scale to draw out supply out of the forest. And then similarly, if you exclude Pan Pac, because their operations are a little bit different, but there are 8 other large forest owners and many other small forest owners who would have to work together to aggregate their supply as well for it to be I'm going to say worthwhile, because I can't think of a better word right now, to create a biomass supply chain. And so do need collaboration within the sites. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, when you say that, I can see a really big dot in Hastings there. Is that still too small for the scale you're talking about?
Yeah, it's probably still too small to make a individual pallet plant from scratch, from a greenfield, but it probably would be big enough for if it wanted to take a wood chip as a fuel, then one of the wood processors down the road might be willing to supply it at that level as well. So yeah, it's a little bit horses for courses, but yes. There's also clusters of sites that you're probably aware of in your industrial zones. So near Awatoto and Te Moana, which you pointed out, the big dot. So maybe there's an opportunity for a centralised heating system. So instead of Hawke's Bay Protein having a 1 megawatt boiler, and Ziwi and Woolworks and Bremworth having their own boilers, what if they just had one centralised boiler and then had piping to deliver that steam across different sites? So there are other opportunities. EECA will be working as close as and as much as we can, but as many people as we can get on board with these sorts of ideas and projects will be beneficial. Right, I've got
another question. Is the hospital linked in? Is that deemed industrial, or is that completely out of your work stream?
That's in this work stream. So we do kind of focus on industrial process heat, but it's really just large sites. So our cutoff is any site that generates more than 500 tonnes per annum of stationary emissions. So Hawke's Bay Hospital is included in here in the program. Yeah.
Thank you.
And can I just clarify the barrier? Is it for individual companies to reinstate their equipment to be able to handle it, or do we need to set up essentially a processing plant to turn it from slash into a usable product? Is that the main barrier?
Yeah, there's all of the things you mentioned kind of have to happen in unison. So from the demand side, they need a new boiler. You can't convert a gas-fired boiler to a biomass boiler. You need brand new kit, and then when you're dealing with a solid fuel, you also need to deal with storage of that fuel where there isn't a worry for piped gas. And also you need trucking movements and a whole lot of other considerations into your site. So there are site changes that need to be made, as well as boiler changes on the demand side, all of which may require council consenting and a whole lot of other things. And then from the biomass supply side, it's getting a party or parties to create that aggregation hub, because you don't want to have 4 different people trying to make wood chips in the Hawke's Bay region. It may not be as economic as all the supply of biomass fibre from the forest coming to one point and that becoming the distribution hub from there once you get that economies of scale. And they'll need chippers and dryers and a whole lot of other things as well.
Okay.
All right, we've got two more slides. So just a quick note that there is some work underway. There's some great stuff happening in the region. So Napier Pine and AFCO, Bremworth and Woolworks Innovation have all got projects that we're aware of at ICA that will save a lot of carbon. And so the momentum is building. All right. And just to leave you with the final thoughts, so, Hawke's Bay's got a fantastic opportunity for decarbonising heat and becoming more resilient from within its own kararohi. It will reduce emissions, it will create demand for over half of all of the residues that we assess to be out there in the forest. So if you think about the NESCF being the stick, the carrot could be, well, if you get this material out, there's a market for it now and you're going to be paid for it. So that's probably a much better story than the stick story, potentially. And so with all these sort of concepts, the challenge to the committee is what is your area of influence and how can you help accelerate the collaboration, all these projects, and get momentum on this to actually come to fruition.
Brilliant. Do we have any further questions? Noting we've got 5 minutes left in the Zoom. Zan.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you for that presentation, Oliver. That's a speed date if ever I saw one, knowing how much information sits in behind that. Just to check in, I really enjoyed being at the industry day or part of it a couple of weeks ago. My big takeaway, and just testing my understanding, and I think it's been reflected here, is that already at current gas prices, it is economic to convert to biomass. We have the supply, we have the potential demand, we just need the infrastructure and the collaboration to make it happen. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, so I think our base gas price was about $18 per gigajoule because we have to reference kind of what's out there. So we've used an MB figure, but like I said, PAMPAC is out there in the media saying they've got $39 a gigajoule. And so if someone's paying significantly more for gas than what we assumed, then those projects are economical a lot sooner. And there's also a real desire from these companies as well, because you get the climate benefit and the marketing benefit as well off the back of these kind of projects.
And thank you. And just a follow-up question. Are there models, either within New Zealand or elsewhere, of where this kind of ecosystem is working? So can we go and steal someone else's model and get it going?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So, Port Blakely and the South Canterbury region is already recovering all their residues out of their forests, and they're bringing that into biomass products. Then we've got Niagara or Pioneer Energy down in Southland that have created a centralised hub, and then that's distributing biomass all throughout the Southland region. Southland is quite, I'd say, well through the decarbonisation journey, given they're moving off coal. I think they've got moved about 100 boilers and they've got 100 left, sort of thing.
Wow.
So yeah, there are examples within New Zealand, and then international examples I'd maybe steer away of, because there are some awesome examples out there, but they're predominantly in Europe, where there's where forestry assets are owned by central government, and they can just kind of mandate, and they've got they own the wood processing and all that sort of stuff. So it's not a model that we could easily replicate here, because we've got private ownership across each of the different parts. So it's a lot harder for us to get those models working in a New Zealand context.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Fabulous. Yeah. And so this to me sort of sounds like something that we were talking about in that climate action thing. This is something that we could potentially, as a committee, lend the mana of the committee to advocate and get out there and champion the industry setup, essentially. Thank you very much for that, Oliver. I haven't got any more hands up, and we're almost at the end of our meeting. So might bring us back to the paper, which the recommendation is that we receive and note the deputation. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Deputy Mayor Kerr and seconded by Councillor Harding. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Oliver.
Stop presenting.
And just, I suppose, a huge thank you to the committee. I was at a governance course recently, and one of the things that we discussed was climate change as a big, as one of the big topics facing us at the moment. And one of the things I took away from it is that this is hard because this feels hard, and it is hard because it is hard, and everybody out there seems to be struggling with it. I think the scope of this committee is so broad. We're looking at the entirety of Hawke's Bay. We all have different perspectives that we come to this table with. So we're like it feels like we're taking quite a bit to get on our feet, but I'm hopeful that when we get there, we'll be running. And once we've worked out exactly how we're going to bring all our perspectives together and really sort of strategically start to drive some of those actions, I know Sam and I will be feeling a lot more comfortable when we're getting to the action. So thank you for everything you're putting in so far. And it's hard because it is hard. So, without further ado, we'll close with a closing karakia. Sam, would you like to close us off again?
Yeah, I'm going to use my favourite one. Unuhia. So, unuhia, unuhira, ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wara i te ara takata. Koia rā e rongo, whakaaere ake ke ronga, kia tina, tina, haumie, hui,
Tāki. Thank you very much, everybody, for a marathon afternoon.